Have I ever read the Bible?
No.
I haven't read the Bible.
For my own reasons, no.
I've skimmed it.
I have read the Bible.
I kind of looked at little segments, but I've never actually attempted to read the whole thing.
It's not advertised enough. Like, I don't go to church, so the time when I do read it is when I'm in church, but other than that, like, I don't have a copy of the Bible. Yeah.
They're interesting stories, like as a guide for people how to live, not necessarily taken literally.
I thought it was daunting.
It's been a long time, so I don't really remember everything.
Story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam and Eve.
Like stories about Jesus and his life.
Up there, of course, there's Genesis.
I don't know the difference between sort of like the different books and stuff, but I do know Genesis is the first one. Or is that an argument? I don't know.
Good evening. I don't know where you are with the Bible. I don't know what goes through your mind when you hear or you're asked questions like that. Do you think it's kind of outdated, boring, full of contradictions, really difficult to understand or to read, full of weird stuff, names that you can't pronounce? Maybe you think it might be a bit of a rule book, or it's not relevant to you whatsoever. Well, that was me, really, for almost or just over 39 years of my life. My first encounter with the Bible was in a magistrate's court in Manchester. I had to place my hand on it, and I had to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. And soon after that lie, I was given a prison sentence by the magistrate's court and sent to a prison just outside Manchester, between Manchester and Liverpool, called Risley. I was born into a really dysfunctional family, the Cowley family. Both my parents, I've got no brothers or sisters, but both my parents were alcoholics, and both atheists, and both from Birkenhead and Toxteth in Liverpool. My father was very violent, big man, 6'2" in his prime, and very sort of unpredictable. You just never knew what was going to happen with him. My mother was just about 5 foot, small but volcanic. Again, could just explode at any time. And like I said, we lived in Manchester on some pretty rough estates. I was born in Salford. So my childhood, really, probably like a lot of you in here, wasn't a great time for me. And I think having two alcoholic parents, you may have experienced that. I think having that sort of experience will knock most things out of you, especially any hope or trust that you might have in yourself or really in anyone else that's around you. At 15, two things happened to me really almost together. I was expelled from school for truancy, really. I went to a comprehensive in Manchester, and it was awful. And I never went because I was bullied. Again, if you've experienced that, you know what that's like. Having been expelled and going home, and then my parents and their life that they led, I ended up getting into an argument with my father. It was between my mum and my dad. It was about debt. It was about women. It was about drink or combination. I can't remember. It was usually all of them. And I got in the middle of my mum and dad, and it was just a really big, nasty argument. And my father basically threw me out. He told me to get out. And in my youth and arrogance, I thought, I'm out of here. I ran upstairs. I grabbed a bag. I put some clothes in it, and I ran out the door. And I got about 10 meters out, and I thought, I have no idea where I'm going. But actually, it's got to be better out there than it is in there. So I was homeless for a while. I moved into a squat with some young men and young women, and that led me into crime, petty theft at first, stealing from shops, and then it was from houses, and then it was warehouses and factories, and that led me to have a relationship with the police, bound over to keep the peace, probation, which I never went on, and finally I stood in front of a magistrate in Manchester, and I was sentenced to prison. When I came out of prison can have a lot of effect on you in different ways, but basically when I came out, I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with my mother and father, no matter how bad it was. And I got home to where we were living last. They didn't come to visit me. And I found out that really my parents had moved, separated, and eventually they got divorced. So I was on my own again. But this time I just didn't want to get into trouble. I certainly didn't want to go to prison again. So I got myself a one-room flat. I was holding down 2 jobs, driving a truck during the day and working in the bar at night. And during that time, I happened to pass a poster, a big billboard in Manchester. And it was amazing marketing when I think about it. It was a poster with 2 soldiers in camouflage uniform. Backdrop was mountains with snow. It was blue skies. It was sunny. They were smiling and they were skiing. And it said underneath, you know what, a life of adventure? Then join the British Army. And that poster was enough for me. After a lot of persuasion and a lot of interviews, I was accepted into the army, and that was one of the most exciting days of my life. But that day was the second encounter I'd ever had with a Bible. It's this one. And I had to lay my hand on that Bible, and this time swear allegiance to the crown. I was given a day's pay, and my army career began. And it says, isn't it, this book was used in the accestation and ceremony of Paul Cowley on enlistment into the army at Manchester on the 15th of the 1st, 76. And it says underneath, it is presented on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen for personal use as a source of spiritual and moral guidance during army service. Didn't really work for me, that at all. At 21, I joined the army and I was posted to Germany. I got married because I had to take my girlfriend to Germany. I had to get married, so I got married really quickly. At 22, I had a son, Clinton, which was an amazing day to have this boy born. It was great. At 25, I couldn't really handle the responsibility of trying to be a faithful husband because I had no model for that, didn't know what that looked like. And I couldn't handle the responsibility of trying to be a father, to look after my son. I couldn't do it. So I got divorced. I sent my wife and my son packing back to England, and I got on with my career. I didn't see Clinton really for around 10 years. Why? Because when I used to have the day out with my son and I'd go and meet him and it'd be a great day with Dad and everything, and then I'd take him back and he'd burst into tears spontaneously as I handed him back to his mum, and I couldn't bear it. I couldn't handle that pressure when he cried. So, like everything else I did in my life at that time, I just ran away from the responsibility and I never saw him again for almost 11 years. I was on my own for a while then, which I liked, and I didn't like being on my own, and at 27 I got married again. 2 years later, another divorce. You can see there's a theme going on here. That was my life, really. Beneath the bravado, there was this pain, this broken promise, this broken relationships all the time. My life was full of drink, it was full of debt, it was full of divorce, and really, when I look back, just a lot of despair, but I didn't know. And the only stable thing I had really in my life was my career. And I spent the next 16 and a half years in the military doing anything that came my way, volunteering for everything, postings, courses. I volunteered for 2 tours of Northern Ireland. I volunteered to go to the Falklands with a rapier detachment. I was in 4 different regiments, and my last 4 years were Army Physical Training Corps. So I did get to ski, but it took nearly 16 years to get there. The Army physically saved my life, absolutely. God only knows where I would be without it. But morally and spiritually, like it says in that Bible, it didn't really help me at all. I was completely bankrupt. I left the Army and started working in the fitness industry because that's what I was trained for. Out of the PT Corps, became a personal trainer. I managed a couple of health clubs in London, which were brilliant, great jobs, well paid. But maybe you know that feeling, just not really satisfied with the stuff that I had. And I had a lot of stuff. Restless. And a few years ago, I walked in through those doors, which you probably came in tonight, to start an Alpha course. Why? I had absolutely no idea. A friend of mine, like Tash, I just got sort of invited, and I thought, yeah, whatever. I've done so many courses in the Army. I'll do a course on God and see what happens. I struggled with some bits of it. I don't mind admitting that to you. I wasn't really sure about it. And I attended the weekend, which you've got coming up. And it was on that weekend. It was there at that sort of, let's call it a seaside resort, that I met with God. And it was a bit of a shock, probably for both of us. Why was it a shock for me? Because I didn't think that he was looking for someone like me. I've shared some stuff with you tonight, but I wouldn't share everything. I'd be too embarrassed. I met this God that wasn't vengeful, that wasn't judgmental, a God that sort of listened to me, not this God I'd heard about in the army, in the sergeant's mess, or the one my father spoke about. I met Jesus, and it was overwhelming, and still is for me, that he loved me unconditionally. And that's the bit that overwhelmed me, and actually it's still a big deal for me, that he loves me, warts and all, the whole package. You're loved, Paul. And since that weekend, really, my life started to change. Not overnight, but slowly it started to change. Some of my fears left me. I started to trust people again, but I started to change. I could realize it, and people told me. I'd living with my girlfriend for 8 years, bit marriage phobic for obvious reasons, and I felt God say, come on, we can do this stuff together. You can be a good husband. So we got married. I got my relationship back with my son. He just walked back into my life. Clinton's now 40 years of age, and we see each other most days. He texts me, and we have a really close relationship. How that happens, only God can do that. I've got a daughter, Phoebe, who's 20 and absolutely gorgeous. And I'm doing what I believe God has called me to do. Working with prisoners, ex-offenders, people who are on the street, people who are lost, people who are broken, marginalized, just can't make that sort of whatever it is you're supposed to make, just can't do it. And when I read the Bible, it's the people that Jesus seemed to hang around with quite a lot. In 2002, after 3 years training, I was ordained into the Church of England. How that happened, I'm still not sure. How does all that change take place, which I've just whapped through really quickly? It started for me when I started to listen to God, which you're doing now really on this course, trying to decide about God, take some guidance, and start actually to read this book, the Bible, which I hadn't read before at all, even though I've still got it with me. And that was a really humbling experience. I didn't really know that God cared so much for us and died for us. I didn't understand that stuff at all. And I've stopped trying to explain how all these things happen really in my life, because really I don't care anymore. I just know it works because I'm standing here explaining to you how my life is different. Some facts about the Bible I just did not know at all. I didn't know that it's a really popular book. It's the most successful book of all time. I didn't know that. Over 5 billion have been printed. Every year, over 100 million Bibles are sold or given away. It's taken off the top sellers list every year because it would be the top seller every year. The Times newspaper in 2007 said this about the Bible. Simply put, the Bible is the most influential book that's ever been written. I didn't know either that it's a really powerful book, what it can do. One former prime minister described the Bible as highly explosive. It has an impact when you read it, an impact on people, their lives. One guy I knew in prison, Frank, used to sleep with the Bible on his pillow. He'd put his head on it, and he'd have this indentation when he'd come into chapel in the morning where the Bible's been. And I'd say, Frank, what are you doing? He said, I'm just trying to get a lot of this into my head. But it wasn't far off at all. It was Einstein who said, I want to know the thoughts of God. So Frank wasn't far away from the truth. I didn't really know it was a precious book either. You know, at her coronation, the Queen was presented with a copy of the Bible. And these words were spoken over by the Archbishop. We present you with this book, the most valuable thing the world affords. The book itself is just a book. It's a means to an end. It's pages, it's paper. It's got some ink on it with some words around it. The psalmist says that it's more precious than gold. Why is that? For years, I carried this Bible around with me, and I've still got it. But I couldn't understand it. I tried to read it in Northern Ireland. I tried to read it in the Falklands. I've tried to read it on various operations, on my own, depressed. And I just couldn't get my head around it at all. The reason I couldn't understand it, now I know, is I didn't know the author. I didn't know the person who put it together. I had no relationship with God whatsoever, because no one had told me about him at all for nearly 40 years of my life, until someone in the army, and he's in this room tonight, came up to me and told me and sat me down that Jesus Christ loves me. And that was a really difficult conversation for both of us. So now I understand it a little bit more. I didn't really know that it's an inspired book either. Jesus says, "It is written, people do not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God," the written word, the Bible. So it's inspired. Because material things alone, they just don't satisfy. And goodness me, I've tried to fill my life with a lot of material stuff. In fact, most things, even the best human relationships, and I've tried quite a few of them as well, they don't ultimately satisfy us. There's this spiritual hunger in all of us. It's a longing for something bigger than us. I would say it's a longing for God. It may manifest itself in so many different ways, but in every human heart, we need this relationship with our Creator. God's longing to communicate with us, to be in this relationship with us so that we understand the author. And the primary way that God speaks to us is through the Bible. It's through that book that's on your desk or in your chairs. St. Paul puts it like this: all Scripture is inspired by God. What does that mean? It means the Bible is inspired by God. When you read it, it has a ring of truth about it when you read the stories. It proves to be inspired. When you start to put the things into practice, that's what I'm telling you about my own life. It works. I mean, just try it, test it, see if it works for you. I learned about the Bible on the Alpha course like you are, and it's there that I started to understand that God was trying to say to me, Paul, I've got a plan for your life. Reading the Bible one day, I don't read it very often, but I came across the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament, the front part of the Bible. And in chapter 29, verse 11, it says this, really that God has a plan for our lives, a plan to prosper us, to give us hope, and to give us a future and not to harm us. And when I read that, I was amazed because the words just seemed to stand out. I felt like they were speaking to me, jumped off the page. And I love plans. 16 years in the military, I love strategies, I love plans. And when I found out that God's got a plan for me, for Paul Cowley, it became really personal. And maybe the plan for me, maybe my destiny, was to work in prisons. The Bible is broken into two books, like I mentioned, the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament is at the front bit, and the New Testament's at the back. The Old Testament is a history of the Jewish people, really extraordinary stories of captivity and escape and all sorts of things, and skirmishes and individuals rising up at certain moments. It's fascinating. And the New Testament is the life of Jesus, the early church. Extraordinary stories, what people got up to and what they did and what they went through. The Bible was written over 1,600 years by over 40 individuals, different people, kings, scholars, philosophers, poor people, fishermen, poets, statesmen, historians, doctors. Incredible stuff in this book. They wrote it in different styles, such as history, as poetry, as philosophy, and letters, just all different types of literature. So it's 100% the work of human hands. It's a written book, a penned book, but it's also 100% inspired by God. Let me give you an example. So Christopher Wren, goodness me, the greatest English architect of all time, built St. Paul's Cathedral, not far from here. We all know that. But actually, he didn't even lay one stone, one bit of mortar or anything for that building. It was done by carpenters, stonemasons, just everything. Hundreds and hundreds of people over a number of years. 1675, it began, he was 43. Finished in 1711, he was 79. 36 years, but he never laid one single brick. But St. Paul's Cathedral is accredited to Sir Christopher Wren. He was the inspiration, the vision, the mind, the architect, but it was put together by other people. And it's the same with the Bible. Many different writers, one architect, one inspiration. God himself put it together. It can also be a really difficult read. It's not an easy book to read at all. And if you've ever tried to read the Bible, particularly parts of the Old Testament, you find some moral difficulties in there. Things that are just difficult to get your head around, to understand. There are different kinds of writing in the Bible as well. Some lean towards the metaphorical. Some are full of imagery. Some are very and deeply poetic. So you have to read it carefully, like you would any book that you want to understand and enjoy. But even after that, we're left with things that are still difficult to understand, and we shouldn't shy away from saying that. Like the issue of suffering. Goodness me. That's a difficult thing to believe, that we have this God of love, yet we have this suffering in the world when you look around. That's a hard thing to justify, to understand. And understandably, some people reject Christianity on the basis of suffering. And what I've learned is the more I try to wrestle with those big issues, and I still do every single day, the love of God and suffering in the world. When you turn the TV on you read the paper, then you're overwhelmed by the love of God, and you're trying to match those two things together. Not easy answers, but the more we explore, the more we wrestle, the greater our understanding of suffering and our understanding of God's love come together. Try and view the Bible as inspired by God, and then wrestle with the difficult bits of mankind. Don't bin it to one side. You're more than that. Open it up and wrestle with it. Don't be scared of it. Ask, seek understanding. That's what you're doing now. Tackle those questions. I'm getting quite old now, but I've started to like crosswords. And if you're like me, I can never really finish one. But what I've started to do is to get one of the clues, and if you get one clue, then you can't do that, then you move off and you get another one, then you get a line down, then you might get a word to another, then you get a sentence, then it starts to come together. And eventually, like me over years, you might finish one, but it comes together. But I won't throw it away anymore. I'll try and wrestle with it. I didn't know that the Bible was a very practical book at all. The Bible isn't just an inspired book, it's a practical book as well. It's been described as a manual for life. I love that. With practical wisdom on leading a healthy and fulfilled life. Follow it, and it says in Isaiah 58:11, it says that your life will be like a well-watered garden. I love that imagery, that picture of a well-watered garden that's got good soil, it's healthy, it's lush, it's full of color, it's nice to walk around, it's fragrant, a well-watered garden. As some might say, look, I'm not interested in the Bible, it's a rule book. I don't want all those rules and regulations. I want to be free to come and do and be whatever I want to be, and if I follow the Bible, I'm going to lose all that freedom. My life's going to be a real pain, it's going to be really boring. But again, I challenge you, is that right? Does the Bible take away our freedom, or does it actually give us more freedom? Let's take sport. Imagine a football match. Imagine if you had no rules or regulations at all. I love it because it's called the beautiful game, football. But if you had no white lines, no referee, no linesman, no corner flags, no decisions, no red cards, no yellow, if you had no rules or regulations, it would be absolutely chaos. Everyone would be killing themselves. And God has given us these guidelines on how to live, not because he wants to spoil our fun, that we might be boring. He wants to give us these guidelines because he loves us. He wants us to enjoy life as much as we possibly can. That our lives might become a well-watered garden and be a beautiful game. I don't know about you, but I've tried life without guidelines. I've tried it without boundaries for over 40 years. Ignoring rules. It doesn't work. And to be honest, I'd really prefer to know exactly where my boundaries are and have some guidelines for life, because it's really helped me. So it's inspired by God, it's God-breathed, it has the power to change lives. It's changed mine, and the exciting part is that God is still speaking and still changing lives today, tonight, if you will allow him to. And I didn't know that God speaks to us through the Bible either. I didn't understand that. The Bible's like it's like a love letter. It's God's love through the lens of Jesus. And when you get a letter from someone that you love, you treasure it. Not because of the letter itself, it's because you know the person who wrote it. You have a love for the author. I lived apart from my girlfriend, Amanda, who's now my wife, for over 3.5 years, really, while I was stationed in Gibraltar with an infantry battalion. And what we used to do was write to one another, and I've got most of the letters that she wrote to me. And I used to get really excited in the mailroom when I'd see a letter for me. Not because of the letter, but I knew it was from Amanda. So I knew the author. So I've kept them. I tried reading some of these to my daughter when she was about 11 or 12, just to show her what romance was. And I remember getting halfway through one of them, and she went, "No, Daddy, take it, it's horrible, I don't want..." And then we moved on to technology, and we started doing tapes to one another, and I got excited when I got a tape. It's because I knew the author. I tried reading this Bible lots of times, and until I had that relationship, it really didn't work for me. Those letters to me from Amanda were important because I had a relationship with the person who sent them. And the whole point of this book, the Bible, is for us to have a relationship with the author. Romans 10 says that faith comes through hearing the word of God. And if you want to grow in faith, I would definitely encourage you to read it when you can. There's no rules or regulations. Particularly the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I love Mark. It's like as Stephen would say, it's like an action movie. Martin Luther said this: "The Bible is alive. It speaks to me. It has feet. It runs after me. It lays hands on me, and it holds me." I love that definition. So how and when should we read the Bible? Well, I think it's easy to be overly ambitious. Just take it a little bit at a time. No particular place, wherever you feel comfortable to read it. No particular time. Whenever's good for you, pick it up whenever you can. I'm hopeless at trying to set a time and a place. I've always tried and I've failed, and I feel bad that I haven't read it. Then I get into a panic and I read it and I put it down again. It doesn't really matter. As long as you can pick it up at time and say, "Lord God, will you help me try and understand this book?" I've made a deal with God that I will pick the book up and open it, and his part, he has to help me understand it. Try and have a plan if you can. Time is precious. You're all amazingly busy people. Find a time, maybe 10 minutes a day, even 5 minutes a day. Find a place, bus, train, tube, home, anywhere, flat, park, wherever you want to. Find a pattern. Ask God to help you understand the letter that he's written to you. Or use the Bible in 1 Year, the app, which you can download. It's brilliant. I love it. So put your headphones on, go for a run, and I can get the scriptures as I'm doing the physical training, which I really love doing. It's brilliant. Read one of the passages or listen to one of the passages. Nikki's commentary, or if I'm pushed, I usually just jump to Pippa's commentary at the end. Or I listen to it at night before I go to sleep. It's fantastic. I'm asleep in about 2 minutes. It's brilliant for getting you to sleep. But you know what? It's still going in. And I wouldn't worry if you don't understand everything. The main question is to ask, what is God saying to you, me, when you read part of it? How does it apply to me? What difference does it make to my life today as I'm walking around London? And the great thing, as you start to read it tomorrow or try and read it every day, if you did it every day in a year, you'd go through the whole Bible if you follow the plan. I'm still working on that, about 5 years in, and I've not finished yet. But don't set yourself these unrealistic targets. As I said, try 5 minutes a day. It really is the best investment you could ever make or start to make. I remember my dad. I mentioned him at the beginning of this talk, that he was just a difficult person. He was just a really hard, violent sort of man. Heavy drinker, crude, vulgar, big and unpredictable, and just a nightmare to be around as a kid and as an adult. We never really got on. And like I said, at 16, we had this fight. I left home, and I never saw him again for many, many years. I didn't want to see him. When I became a Christian, I had this desire to see him. I didn't have it. God put it in me. And I wanted to see my dad again. Why? Because I'd changed. I was different. I felt different to him. The problem is he hadn't changed at all. When I did go to see him, he was just older, drunker, grumpier, more unpredictable. I would buy him tickets. He lived in Manchester on his own, and I would buy him these tickets, and I'd send them up to him, and I'd say, come down to London with my family now and come and be with us. And I'd go and meet him at Euston Station when he arrived. Always arrived drunk off the train. And as I'd go to meet him on the platform, he would constantly start complaining. Here, son, it would be nice to travel business because you're a millionaire. You could have sent me first class. Just always complaining. Never really happy. And it drove me mad. And he'd do that every time we'd bring him down. And one weekend, it got so bad, I said to Amanda, I can't do this anymore. I just can't be around him. It's not going to end well. It's too painful for me. And he would stay with us, and it would be hell, to be honest. Arguments, drinking, long silences. He'd be rude to Phoebe when she was very young, and it was just horrible. And this constant complaining about his lack of money, this economy travel, these tickets that I would send him, making me feel guilty all the time. So I asked Amanda what I should do, and she said, Paul, you need to pray more, which really didn't help me. Or then she said, Paul, you need to read the Bible more. Paul, why don't you ask God to guide you? And I knew that stuff, I just didn't want to do it. And I did pray. I said, God, you need to help me how to be with my dad. I don't know how to do that stuff. I'm lost. And I prayed. And I looked at the Bible. And at first it didn't get any better. It was still a nightmare having him to stay with us. The complaining, the money, the travel, everything all the time. As soon as he'd get to the house. And one day it got bad again and I walked out. I said, I've had enough. And I took my Bible with me and I sat in the park. And I started to thumb through it, not looking for it really. And I landed on the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy. Why? I have no idea. And something stood out on the page, one of the commandments, and it said, honor your mother and father. And that is exactly not what I wanted to hear. Not an easy scripture to me to honor any of them. But I tried. And for a while it did get a little bit better. In fact, he didn't change, but the things he said to me didn't hurt me as much. The words didn't cut as much. And on one Sunday, when he was going back up to Manchester, we took him to the station, Amanda and Phoebe, and we put him on the train. I was thinking, good, he's going back to Manchester. We put him on the train, and Amanda and Phoebe were sort of settling him down. And as I looked at my father, I had this overwhelming feeling of love for him, which was really weird, and I didn't know where it came from. And I saw on his head, I tell you not to lie, honor your father. And I thought, what is that honor your father stuff? And I got overwhelmed, and I thought, I'm going to honor my father. What can I do? And I said to Amanda, I'm just nipping off for a minute. And I jumped off the train, and I ran to the ticket place, and I bought a really expensive first-class single ticket back to Manchester. And I ran back on the train, and I grabbed him. They said, what's going on? My dad was going, hey, what's going on here? What? And I picked him up, and we walked into the first-class compartment, and I sat him down in the leather seats, and then the buzzer went, whatever it was, the door started to close, and we all jumped off, door shut, and I saw my father through the window in the first-class compartment. And he was like this. He took his trilby off, and he put his trilby on the table. Then he hit the recline button, and he kind of went back like this. Then he put his hand up, and one of the guys brought him a cup of tea. Then he got his paper out like this. And he looked at me through, and he had the biggest smile on his face I've ever seen. Like every kid's Christmas had all come at once. Everything. His face was beaming. And as it sort of train pulled out of Euston Station, Amanda said to me, what is going on there? I said, you know what? I have no idea. I just wanted to see my dad smile. I wanted to see him happy, and I wanted to honor him. That was the last time I ever saw my father. 3 weeks later, he died of a massive heart attack on his own. Now, was that me with the first-class ticket, or was that God prompting me helping me, guiding me, giving me inspiration, thoughts, what to do. Because the only image I've got of my father now is that face. All the pain, all the arguments, all the fighting, everything. I've just got my dad's face. That's the only thing that I've got left. God is not trying to sort of force us into something. He wants to work with us. He wants to walk alongside us. He wants to give us words of wisdom, that our life might be like a well-watered garden, that it might be fulfilled, and give us some boundaries and some inspiration. The Bible for us, he gives us it for life. It's like he comes alongside and says, "Do you know what? How much have you got left of your life?" "Well, I've just got about that much left at the moment." And he says, "Why don't you give me that and we'll do it together?" And then he asks us a question, really. Oh, let me leave you with a question. Is God trying to speak to you? And if he is, will you allow him to? You never quite know what will happen when you open this book. It may just change your life forever.